So I'll give you one here. This is kind of just reflections on the technological revolution itself. I'm not seeing nearly as much dialogue or discourse on this as I feel like there needs to be or there should be. Because a great way for me to visualize this is, again, right, as is typical for this project, when I'm grounding history and the material phenomena, artifacts of consciousness, as in consciousness evolution and psyche transformation, I'm looking at these image artifacts of baseball history. Photographs, cabinet photos, even posters or broadsides, things like that. Because when we're looking at the image artifact, we're looking at the projection of the psyche with the expressive vehicle that it has available to itself at the time. So any linguistic or any language is going to be fundamentally distillable into a phenomenology, as in a perception or perceptive mechanism. So this is to say any symbol or any letter, any sentence, any genome is going to represent itself phenomenologically as an image. This is the same thing as the waveform, and this is the connection between music and the visual arts, and this is the connection between the waveform, as in the psychotropic field of consciousness or psychotrophic field of consciousness itself, and that way in which it manifests or embodies itself in space and in time. And this is fundamentally the realm, again, of it's the realm of the mythic, and it's the realm of the depth psychological, and it's the realm of the world historical tales of Genesis, creation, destruction, and the Hindu Vedantic Maya, or the samsara. Because really what we're talking about at a physical, biological, cosmological level is just transformations of the field of consciousness, or the field of the waveform as it is currently existing. And by currently existing, it's something to say of a live wire or electricity. And I saw this great Niels Bohr quote the other day. He said it advanced science and advanced physics, really what we're doing is we're using poetic language to elucidate reality. And this is the grasping at which, when we ground this in history and materialism through consciousness artifacts, particularly through human culture, because human culture is the human experience of the transformation of consciousness vis-a-vis technology. And this is why when we get a little too far up into this waveform idea of the psychotropic sphere or psychotropic realm of consciousness, we get too abstract. And this is the difficulty, especially when you're grounding theoretical physics, theoretical science, quantum mechanics in a formula or in mathematics. And this is why I draw it into history and culture, because we want to get the waveform into space and into time and talk about how it transforms in a realm of locality. And the easiest way to do this for me is to just draw it directly into modernity and look at this 100-year time scale, or this 100-year period. We could say more like 150 years, kind of moving through the advent of the photograph into artificial intelligence and the personal computational device, to look at how it changes the representation of that which is, as in reality itself, because it's image producing. The genome is image producing. It's not only producing the phenotype of the body, which is also the human experience indelibly and ineluctably, but furthermore, the human experience is itself always already producing images, as in its perceptive aperture. So this is the psychic status of the human being itself, which is a way of viewing and a way of seeing and a way of perceiving, and this is precisely where we talk about the interfacing with technology. So when I'm looking at this 1881-1882 Toronto baseball cabinet photo, Toronto Baseball Club, you're looking at this precipice, along with Nietzsche, along with Oscar Wilde and Baudelaire and Edgar Allan Poe, this precipice of human consciousness verging on utter and total transformation out from the agrarian, and baseball itself becomes this technology on the precipice. The wooden bat and the covered baseball, these technologies, as you can see here with the catcher's mask, these forms of creating the prosthetic uniform and technology in which to participate in the cultural sport and element of baseball. And then furthermore, the capture by the early photographic device, the transposing of that early photographic light device onto the canvas of the photographic paper, which has then been attached to a cabinet backing here, is the intersection with this sort of Paleolithic sticks and stones, agrarian emerging industrial consciousness interfacing with this light transformation device of the camera, which we then later come to know in its more advanced forms as the computer or the cell phone, in terms of its depiction and rendering of light. The camera is taking light from space and transforming it into an object in time which retains timelessness, which is to say, it becomes a temporal rift, which represents that status and space of consciousness in which and in when it was depicted. It grabs that moment in time and makes that moment in time eternal. But what we have with cell phones and what we have with computational devices and what we have with artificial intelligence is we're continually rendering timeless moments to the point of which we lose the linear agrarian sun and moon cycle form of space-time, and we're thrust into a continuous eternal presence which necessarily is ungrounded by the physical, which can be created and recreated, produced and reproduced entirely through digital light transfer and transformation. So again, this is an uprooting of consciousness from the physical terrain of the biological body and implanting of it, seeding of it into a digital realm, a sort of pseudo-terrarium where consciousness now increasingly lives and is being input and is inputting. So this is a lift. This is a lift off from space-time. Baseball itself in many ways documents this bridge, because it begins, it is founded, it is organized both here in Canada, in Cuba, and in the United States in and around this hinge. It professionalizes in and around this hinge, and it mass popularizes. It peaks and it rides that peak through the creation, advent, and distribution of the photojournalistic artifact at the turn of 1900 into the early mid-1900s. So this is what's so fascinating to me about the photograph, because the photograph itself no longer resides in the interpretive realm of the illustrative, whether that's the Lascaux Caves, or the painterly, as in everything from, let's say, Rembrandt to Duchamp, in the sense that we've left the interpretive realm of the human being and we've entered the realm of the technological device rendering the human being. The human being is now being captured. The human being is not capturing, which again, as I discussed, this form of advanced digital industrial technology is inherently predatory, in the sense that the human being is formerly a predatory form of consciousness, which is attempting to bottle, interpret, and capture life. And the camera itself becomes a philosophical model in the sense that it captures the human being within life and renders the human being with a level of authenticity that surpasses the human interpretive device of the psyche. And this is really kind of the sweet spot of what I'm discussing when I'm talking about the historical material of the timelessness of the photograph and the depiction of the terraforming of the human psyche, because the human psyche wears itself like a mask in space and in time. And it wears its status or its space or its field, its imaginal field, its terrain. This is something that's worn in the body, worn in the expression, and worn in the active movement. because this again, the human being and the human body is a genetic and epigenetic technological device of psychological interpretation using synaptic and neurological information. This is the basis of somatic healing, nervous system healing, even energetic healing as it's understood in the ancient traditional Chinese, and emerging increasingly with a quantum mechanical integration of healing and medicine into the formerly Newtonian-based symptom and symptomatic treatment system of Western medicine. And this is where we really, really, really get into something interesting, because the psychological status is everything, and this is well understood in the Gnostic precepts, in the Neoplatonic precepts of the understanding of the mind being the highest universal power. And again, when we talk about the field of consciousness itself proper and the field of psyche itself proper, we're talking about a universal transformation and transformative apparatus through which the material things, as in that which they appear to be, the waveform, the frequency at which they are appearing in space-time, as embodied tacit and taciturn agreements at the molecular and chemical and elemental level, which is to say, these are microscopic bacterial and cellular unities which are assembling themselves through a coherent agreement as in a genetic script in and upon the field of play, which is the field of space-time, and are thus themselves always already being transformed and changed at the molecular level, and thus foundationally at the level of the waveform in that which they appear and, you could say, warble in and out of space-time. This is a frequency and a signature of information which is being changed in itself through space-time in its various different interrelations, which is to say this is visualized in a Newtonian sense as gravity, relativity. These are the forces and the force fields, as in electromagnetic fields, which are at play in being and time. And this is, again, where we're touching explicitly the psychological dimension of the transformation of the waveform, which is a synaptic electrical wave field of mind. And that the body itself is mind, just as much as the brain is mind. If you can understand this, right? Because these are different statuses of the development of the stratification of sentience. We talk about animals or plants. The terrarium of the earth itself. This is an ecosystem of emergent awareness. This is an ecosystem of emergent energetic interactions, electrical interactions, nuclear interactions. And this is fundamentally social because it's an energetic exchange, which returns us to the thermodynamic and the thermonuclear as the exchange rate of the cosmos itself. And so when you have this energy changing forms, there's different ways to discuss it, whether you want to discuss it in terms of the metabolic or caloric dimension of the human digestive system, whether you want to talk about it as in terms of the chlorophyll of the plant's blood, or Galileo's precept that wine is a mixture of sunlight and water. This is a profound elemental science that is breaking down the appearance of things as that which they are and they appear to be, down to the molecular level, and then beyond the molecular level into the waveform, which is the taciturn agreement which produces the appearance of the gathering of molecules itself, and then thus creates the status of water as an elemental signature. A binding compound, comprehensive agreement, which at any moment can be abolished by any sort of situational circumstances or terms. And so when we look at human history, right, we're grounding this in human history, and this is what's so fascinating about human history, is that we're looking at the technologies. I mean, much of human history is a repetition of same. The pre-1900s, even pre-1800s, right, as we recede further and further back into a mechanical trance of kind of basic elemental object forms, such as the wooden ship, right? We're talking about effectively prelapsarian modes of technology, which themselves are very much so still entwined with nature. And this brings us back to the advent of the forebrain. Before the advent of the forebrain, we're looking effectively at a status of holistic nature. And where it gets fascinating to me is at the break of 1900 with the hyperacceleration of digital technology, digital information, because this is effectively at a molecular level the generation of a profound heat source in and at the level of the human species, equivalent to a rocket, which is igniting the water molecule, heating a pot on a stove, so to speak. And this is an elemental increase of chaos, which is to say an increase in space-time interactions, producing wildly unpredictable and chaotic outcomes because the human being has breached space and time fundamentally in a quantum mechanical sense through its technologies, through its consciousness, through its perception, and even quite literally through the discovery of quantum mechanics. And as such, has begun to subvert, turn inward on the fundamental elemental precepts of reality itself, such as the creation of the light bulb in relationship to the sun, the creation of the car in relationship to the ambulatory capacities of the human being, the creation of the airplane in mimicry of the bird. And this is something that Da Vinci was very early on working on and understood this motility, this motory mechanics of the universal, and deciphering and encoding this in such a way as even going deeply into the heart itself as an energetic vortex, as it appears, as it is an organ that is wrapped around itself vortexually, and understanding this, the way in which the shape of the vortex of the heart appears is actually itself the field that it produces electromagnetically. And this is very nuanced. This is a very nuanced, poetic, but also deeply scientific and scientific methodology into the source and heart of nature as that which continually reproduces itself at scale, at levels and at scale. And this is breaking into the breach of the code of nature, which unifies us with the primordial genetic cosmos itself into this moment here in 1881 with this cabinet photograph of the Toronto Baseball Club and the formation of a coherent professional league in Canada towards the turn of the 20th century. And this is again, I want to get deep into that connection in that gear of the psyche as it informs space and time and changes form, right? This idea that mind itself is that which turns the gear, which produces the machinic appearance of reality. And this is no easier to see than in the evolution of the human being itself as that which reflects upon nature and begins to tinker with it, from everything to fire, to cave painting, to the consumption of the plant or the animal, the psychotropic effects therein in some cases, such as the Eleusinian rituals in ancient Greece. From there to the creation of a sport like baseball, which is the carving of a bat from the wood of a tree, or the camera, or as we discussed, the cell phone with the mining of precious metals, the use of oil from deep in the earth, natural gases to power civilizations with cars and machines that build skyscrapers, that house massive factories and those who work in those factories, such as New York City in the early 1900s. We're looking at a very high strangeness, but this to modern civilization, the modern consciousness, appears to be normal, but really it's a radical disjuncture. It's a psychotrophy. It's a transformation of the psychological field of nature and existence itself due to this radical recursion of technology, which itself is an innovation equivalent to and on par of the spark of sentience produced by the recombinative powers of nature in space-time through chemical and elemental interaction. This is really what technology at a human level, especially digital and digitizing technology, such as the technological evolution and revolution of the 20th century, is equivalent to truly, because what it signifies is we could say archetypally a Job-esque lapsing of consciousness and the emergent psyche up from the sentient being, and sentience as it is a chemical and electromagnetically produced experience through the synaptic architecture of the human being and the nervous system architecture of the human being. It's profoundly advanced organic system, biological compound, which is producing consciousness, which is reflecting itself upon this substratum of nature, this archaic architect, which is producing it, and then furthermore, this is doubled in the 20th century with the advent of the increasing advent of these kind of codexes of nature, these technologies which reflect in and upon nature. Again, everything from the car to the light bulb to the cell phone. And so this is actively, right, if we look at the human experience, and this is why the photograph is so key, and the photograph being invented at the outset of this kind of expedition of industrial consciousness is so important, because it is no longer the human being interpretively depicting reality. It's the photograph archiving, depicting, exhibiting the human being as it is being radically psychotrophically changed by the technologies it is unconsciously reproducing, discovering and uncovering from the sedimentary foundation, not only of the bowels of the earth itself, but the quantum mechanical field of the cosmological existence of nature itself. And so you're actually watching the human being being made strange, being terraformed by the very technologies it is producing or creating as a sort of psychological lifeblood or a creative artistic lifeblood out from the bowels of nature and the elemental, chemical, and molecular and even hormonal potentialities of the earth. It is drawing out these strange metallurgies. This is the literalization and manifestation of the alchemical consciousness as it was understood in medieval times. It's the realization of the potentials implicit and latent within that field, because what's happening is the lead of the earth is being drawn out and transformed into this magical screen of blue light, which can represent the most fantastical images and create forms of immediacy which would be hitherto unprecedented in let's say Paleolithic or prelapsarian or agrarian times, in which the mode of consciousness is utterly and elementally tied to nature, with maybe rudimentary tools such as the spear or the arrowhead or the understanding of how to create fire. Right? These are technologies which are very rudimentary recombinations that lie dormant and latent within the energetic potentialities of nature itself, which is to say the chemical and elemental compounds, which are the composition of all that is. It's the language of the species, not only in that which it speaks, but that which it is at its deepest level. And then beyond that, these are waveform densities, molecular appearances, chemical appearances in space-time with different recombinative properties. This is the basic foundation of chemistry. But this is also something that applies across fields. It's a morphic device because it's a linguistic device. And so what you're experiencing there is, again, this is akin to the level of strangeness in which what makes possible with the advent of the forebrain, the human being can reflect upon itself. It can reflect upon time. And this kind of emergent consciousness is represented in everything from the voices of the gods in Homer to the Bible. Because what we're discussing here is the human being encountering the vehicle of higher intelligence which carries it into form, and thus discovering and encountering itself as a vision or an experience of a higher power or a higher force, which is pre-phenomenological and is producing the human experience in the human body and the relative field of space-time. As a psychic reality, as a consciousness reality, which is something that is supranatural, terraforming, and transpersonal. As it is the creative force and energetic power and supersystem of all things, which is continuously creatively organizing and reorganizing based on this total field. So this gets us into the question, how are planets formed? But it also gets us into the question of how is the human being working within the planetary consciousness? Which is to say the field of emergent devices, everything from kind of the protean leopard to the Neolithic mind, and into 1881 in Toronto with the formation of early baseball teams in Canada. How is the human being working with this primordial ground and progressively revealing this deeper architecture and thus tinkering with it at its foundation and producing, because this is what the psyche is doing, especially when we hit modernity as a critical mass. It's producing new chemical combinations which are producing new interactions, reactions, and explosions, even down to the atomic and molecular level, such as, again, the atom bomb or the work of Fermi. This is a recombination at the deepest level of the psychic blueprint of nature, the elemental source code, or the primary linguistics, and it's a rearranging of that psychic alphabet. It's a tinkering with the genetic code of mankind to produce these new outcomes. And this is not, again, this is not to moralize any of this, because I think it's such an easy thing to do, and it is being done consistently and constantly, but it is to see it as what it is. And this is what technology is, in an anthropomorphic sense. Just as we have the primary mode of technology, which is the creation of the forebrain in a natural context through biological, chemical, and elemental recombination, which is the human being itself developing and fermenting in space-time, so to speak, through different species-level formations. We're looking back through the eyes of the fish into this scenario and into this space. And to see what happens over this span, which is really no more than 100 or 120, maybe 150 years, you have the advent of the camera, which signifies psychologically, as a historical archetypal circumstance, that technology is now witnessing that which it is changing. The human being is becoming changed through the unleashed Pandora's box expression of the technological, which is most succinctly summed up in the lithium mine, which produces the portable digital blue light screen, which can now, with the advent of artificial intelligence on top of this blue light screen, produce whichever image, whichever symbolic chain one wishes to manifest with such increasing authority, realistic authority, that the bounds of space-time are being compressed down into this blue light energetic system, this electrical system, which again is a mimicry of the electromagnetic field of being and the discourse of waveforms within that electromagnetic field. This is all sound image transformation. But the ability to now manufacture everything entirely within the realm of this one singular device, this singular object device, it has compressed all of space-time, the potentialities of space-time, and then even beyond space-time into the imaginal creative realm of the psyche, which again is the bridge of the artist and the philosopher between the temporal and the eternal. It has created the possibility of all things to be within one imminent artifact. And this is obviously, again, the death of the photograph, because the photograph cannot change form in time. But what the photograph is doing in an early modern sense is depicting the changing form in time, which is the human being's progressive, increasing, exponentially revelating encounter with technology itself as a force and an instrument, which itself has already and is already overtaking the human being and witnessing the human being's change into this high strangeness, which is the rearranging of the psychological architecture of being itself, even localized within the nervous system of the earth itself as an ecosystem. This is a terraformation in everything from the tearing down of the Amazon jungle to smog in Mumbai or Beijing to the bomber airplane, to the atom bomb, to the robot dog or the robot with artificial intelligence incorporated or programmed into it. This is a progressive revelation of things that are highly unnatural and at the same time natural, right? This is kind of how the contemporary pragmatic mind might conceive of technology. It's something that does not exist in nature, but yet has been produced from nature, the foundational elements and organizing components of nature, which is to say the principles underlying and inherent within nature, as well as the molecular structures. It's a taking of these foundational linguistics and writing speech and writing script into the terrain and field of space-time to produce radically new outcomes. And what's fascinating to me is not so much these technologies itself, but what these technologies do in terms of their redoubling in and upon the human being as a precipice. Because the human being itself becomes the interface, much in the way that Nietzsche says that man is a tightrope between God and the beast or the animal, that man becomes a tightrope between technology and the protean past. It's the language of nature which is absorbing what it itself is doing and has done, which has breached the language of nature through synaptic transfusion of information, which is a level of sentience or cognition which has allowed it to breach into that source code and recombine that source code to produce radically new outcomes outside of the bounds of the natural evolutionary trajectory and teleology. It's a hyper-acceleration of natural evolution itself. And we look at the human body or the human being and we say nothing foundationally has changed significantly. We've added the opposable thumb. The forebrain has become technologically advanced over the couple past hundreds of thousands of years. But realistically, nothing within the human body has changed in terms of that glacial natural evolution, the biological and genetic evolution of the human being. But what is happening here is that, again, it's this being torn, it's this push and pull between the glacial and the hyper-evolutionary, exponentially evolutionary element of technology as it pertains to and interrelates with the synaptic and nervous system architecture of the human being itself. And this is what is rending the human being from time and thrusting it into hyperspace as a chamber of revelation, specifically through the mediation of the digital screen as a blue light device which can produce any outcome at this point with ease and with the conviction of truth. And this is the shattering of the Newtonian realm, which is the embodied truth of space-time and the architectural design of space-time, because the human being consciousness is no longer reliant on space-time to produce outcomes. And this is the bewitchment of civilization and culture at the hands of technology, is that it has been rent from the synaptic sun-moon architecture and the rhythm of the human being body and thrust into this technological paradigm where the lights are always on. And this is a shattering of the architecture of the human being as it's a reliant rhythm of the animal to survive within a ecosystem which remains the same. And with the advent of the robot dog, the atom bomb, and the fluorescent light, you've entered into a dimension which no longer has any hold or gravity or ground within that architecture other than the fundamental energetics, as in electricity, which power and produce this ulterior reality, just as much as you could say the necessary architecture of the camera that is required as an energetic device to capture light, transform light, and translate light into the physical image of the photograph as a chemical transfusion of the capturing of this light source etched into the negative and then chemically rendered upon the photographic sheet. So that's what I got. I'll catch you on the next one.